Good morning and welcome. I'm Kelly Wicker, Director of the Science and Technology Innovation Program here at the Wilson Center. Thank you for joining us today for the latest panel in our series examining the impacts of last year's flurry of federal activity on semiconductor resilience and supply. Today, we're discussing the projected workforce shortages that have been in the news a good bit since the new investments have gathered speed. Per a recent study by the Semiconductor Industry Association and Oxford Economics, the United States is projected to face a significant shortage of technicians, computer scientists, and engineers, with a shortfall of about 67,000 of these workers by 2030. Industry giant Intel has been even more pessimistic, projecting a shortage of 70,000 to 90,000 workers over the next few years. And the Commerce Department has warned that workforce shortages will cause fragility in our supply chain. We're here to talk details about the problem that we're facing, but also to talk solutions. And I'm very pleased to be joined by panelists who can tell us what they're seeing working from the perspectives of industry, higher education, and the nonprofit world. Please welcome Sherry Liss, Executive Director of the Semi Foundation, Binal Starley, Director and Professor of the School of Manufacturing Systems and Networks at Arizona State University, Bo Machayo, Director of Federal Government and Public Affairs for Micron Technology, and Daniel Croth, Associate Director for Society at the Special Competitive Studies Project and a Wilson alum himself. Thank you all for being here today. I'll note that we've received a few questions ahead of time from the audience, but I invite the audience to continue to submit more questions via the Q&A box on the screen, and we'll get into those if time permits. Let's kick it off. Let's go with the broad question first. What actually is the nature of the workforce shortage that we're facing as we're scaling up American production? I'm going to go to Daniel first, but I'd love to hear from each of you on this question, so get ready. Daniel, take us away.
Sure, and it's good to be back, although not physically at the Wilson Center. I'm over here at the Special Competitive Studies Project, where my portfolio looks more at sort of the societal implications of technological advancement and techno-economic competition. So in that vein, the nature of the shortage, I think it's important to remember that it's across many layers of the supply chain. You know, it's not as simple as putting people in front of machines in some kind of fab. It's not only at many different layers, but it's also different kinds of jobs across all of those different layers. So we're on sort of the more bearish end. We think that this shortfall is going to be probably more in the 70 to 90,000 range. But it's worth bearing in mind that if we actually want to reshore everything, which has, I think, thankfully sort of fallen out of vogue, the shortfall would be on the order of 300,000 technical workers. So if we want to do this sort of mixed idea where we're going to increase our capacity at home, but continue to rely on allies and partners, it's going to be around 70 to 90,000 people in all kinds of different jobs. And when I say all kinds of jobs, I mean, you know, this reaches as far back as the skilled trades in construction. You know, you need good electricians, and it reaches all the way over to mathematics and pure math. So it's not just going to be that we need more engineers and we need more machine operators, and we do. And sometimes we see policy folks conflating those two. They're very different types of labor. They require different preparation, and the hiring practices for them are very different. But it's going to be all of these different kinds of things. And I'm reminded in particular of the interim president of Michigan State University, of which I'm an alum, crediting the strength of their nuclear physics program in no small part to the abundance of very high skilled welding in the Lansing area. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. When we read that, you know, the sorts of news that you come across or daily briefs or these kinds of things that I think we all see in our jobs, we tend to see the numbers of folks that we need, you know, doing the physical assembly or doing design. But this reaches back, like I said, farther. You need electricians and welders. But this goes even further, actually, where we have a shortfall in mining and processing and related industries. So that's not to say that the problem is bigger than the introduction just gave, but that it has a lot of layers to it. And I don't think it's helpful for us to think of these in terms of tiers of labor, because one of the things I think we need to do to be able to bring more folks into the industry is to sort of destigmatize medium skill labor. But it's a big thing. It's also international. We're talking about this in the case of the United States because that's where most of us are based, and that's the environment in which most of us are working. And we need a roughly five-fold increase in the sort of people we're graduating from these technical programs. But Europe also needs a threefold increase. And you know, on like a Fermi gas level, those are similar levels of problem. So this isn't something that we're alone in. And I think to a certain extent, this shortfall is affecting, and I'll defer to the experts in the room, but I think it's affecting the investment prospects of building new stuff here. Because I think when people are looking at standing up either a greenfield fab or refurbishing something for a brownfield and getting something started up there, they're competing with, for construction labor with a lot of IRA projects and these sorts of things. So all that is to say, I think it's a multifaceted problem. I think we've got the order of it right in that just under 100,000 jobs range, but it's a lot of different kinds of jobs. And I think that should be a good springboard for our conversation today.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to go to Professor Starley next.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you might be. From a university perspective, what we, based on what Daniel just mentioned, it's not just about graduating engineers or graduating technicians from two-year colleges. It's also about the kinds of technical skills that they have to be relevant to this industry that they're looking for. This is a high-tech industry with lots of high-tech nature to it. So when we graduate our electrical engineers or mechanical engineers, do they even have the skills necessary to compete in an industry that keeps the industry competitive? And so don't forget that it's not just about graduating the people, but graduating people with the right skills. And as universities, as two-year colleges, are we preparing them with the right set of skills so that then they find continued employment in there? And the second is also about the existing workforce that might be in other industries. So remember, while the chip industry won't need people, aerospace and defense also needs people, right? There is competing industry sectors within the US that's also looking for people in the high-tech nature too. And so have to establish a pipeline, has to establish a critical need and skill set for these folks to sort of continue coming in there, and enables people or technical workforce to sort of move across sectors. And how do you enable that to happen? And hopefully more solutions come up in that space too.
Thank you. Let's go to Sherry next.
Well, so Daniel and Benil already did some really good intros to all of this, but I agree, I actually think the numbers are going to be much higher in terms of need, but I don't mean to contradict anybody. I think, when we look at the really fuller ecosystem that supports this entire industry, we're looking at a lot of jobs outside of that 70 to 90 that everybody's quoting. But it is going to be a full education shift. I think I'll add my view on this. So in running the SEMI Foundation, our focus is workforce development and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on behalf of this industry. When I look at the needs and the jobs that we have to fill, when I look at the shortfall, even before the CHIPS investment happened on our soil, a lot of people say we don't graduate enough STEM kids. It's not necessarily the case. It's that we're not steering them towards this industry. We're not harnessing that excitement with regards to the gaze towards the microelectronics industry that we need to. So I think part of this challenge, yes, we're going to need workers across the board. We need construction workers. We need folks to fill the fabs. We need the technicians and operators. We need the engineers. We need electrical engineers. We need chemical engineers. We need all of it, right, in this industry. But I think our bigger challenge right now, well, one of our larger challenges right now is capturing the gaze of those students to say, this is an industry I want to be a part of. And I think we have to start that really early. Like, we're looking at K-12 and how do we influence and get kids to even know this is a viable and exciting industry. They're holding their devices all the time, but they know what's on them, but not what powers them, even in the heart of Silicon Valley, and which is where I live. So I think the challenge is so multifaceted. Our students want to work for companies that are doing good. They want to go to companies that are practicing sustainable practices in their businesses. They want to go where there's a diverse community, where they feel like they belong. Like, all of those pieces are going to contribute to how we shape this future workforce and the needs that we're seeing. So it's not just the roles and competencies, although that's such an important part. We need to map what industry is looking for to what's being taught at the university system. We need to do all of that work too, but it has to be coupled with a real push on telling a narrative about this industry that makes it exciting and fun and engaging and sexy and all the things, so that we can capture those STEM students on our side as well.
Thanks so much. And we're going to definitely get into more about, I'd love to unpack some of the K-12 stuff. Bo, I'm going to make you back cleanup here. What's your take on the problem?
I think, everyone has mentioned great data points and the need to make sure that we're really growing, the jobs that the semiconductor industry needs. We kind of at Micro think about it as four buckets. You've got your trades that you have to kind of build up, your technicians, your engineers, and your PhDs. And so the entire continuum of folks, and making sure that especially we're building up these folks, what are the standards that we can work together to develop these folks? It's not just going to be Micron or any of the other semiconductor companies, but how do you make sure that their standards? How are you making sure that we're equipping all of the next generation of semiconductor workforce to really be able to know? And to Sherry's point, how are we also telling a story about what the semiconductor industry means to everyday society? For instance, memory is crucial to a lot of the emerging industries, like AI, like a lot of the things that this generation and generations are kind of very intrigued about. And so how do we make sure that we are both focusing on from a career and technical pathway, non-traditional pathways, and also traditional kind of STEM pathways, to make sure that folks know about the great opportunities that are within the semiconductor industry.
Thanks all for giving us the overview. And I heard a lot of different things I want to chase. So first, Daniel, and I think also Vinal, you guys both talked about how it's affecting investment prospects. How is the shortage changing how industry is thinking about scaling up in the United States, or the viability of what we can do in terms of resilience of our supply chain? And I'll toss that one up. Maybe I'll call on Daniel then.
Sorry, I had a little bit of internet instability there. I think that is going to be something more for someone in the industry. But what I'm basing my opinion of this off of is that we're seeing sort of a lot of public statements about this from people who are looking to invest in new construction and new sites here. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to take those at face value. Right? I personally think that a lot of times that derives from frustration with catching up with a more expensive labor market than where some of these firms are traditionally operating. But nonetheless, they see this as something that they need to resolve. In terms of what specific projects are getting stalled or not stalled, I would kick it over to one of the industry folks.
So I'll say this from a Micron perspective, just as an overview. We have made two investments here in the U.S. post CHIPS and Science Act. One, a $15 billion commitment in Boise, Idaho, which will co-locate our leading edge memory R&D with leading edge manufacturing, bringing that back, leading edge memory manufacturing to the U.S. For the first time in a couple of decades. And then we've invested $100 billion in central New York, in Clay, about 10 miles outside of Syracuse, to bring, which is the largest announced investment post CHIPS and Science Act, which will bring 4 fabs, leading edge memory fabs, into central New York, and create about 9,000 direct jobs and 50,000 jobs in the entire semiconductor ecosystem. And for us, we actually look at this as an opportunity to scale best practices of what we've done across the globe, but also here domestically. And for Micron, we've done a couple of things, and I'll focus in on New York. We've started this Future Ready Innovation Workforce Consortium, which really focuses on bringing together 40 stakeholders, in the local community, to really talk about, from a union's perspective, from community colleges, other non-traditional pathways, how are we really raising and creating these standards to make sure that folks all the way from K through 12 to community colleges really are focusing on how to be a part of this the semiconductor industry. We've also committed to addressing barriers of entry by committing to both our sites in Idaho and in New York to really to put childcare facilities on site, because we know that for working families, it's an important aspect to make sure that there's childcare available for folks to have. We've signed the largest PLA agreement as well, because we know that unions in New York will be able to help us really make sure that we have enough trades to start off our construction process. And also as we ramp up over the next 20 years and build these fabs, are able to have that equipment too. We've also started university networks both in the Northwest and the Northeast, which brings together in the Northeast 30 universities, in the Northwest 14 universities, to figure out where can Micron be of help. Is that enhancing clean room facilities in places that already exist? Is that making sure that there's standards in terms of curriculum development in higher ed? For community colleges, how are we building clean rooms there? We most recently last week unveiled our rendering of the $5 million clean room we're building in Onondaga community colleges. We look at them as opportunities at Micron, the ability to build a workforce and to really attract the next generation of talent to come and work at Micron.
Thanks, Bo.
So, to counter, to sort of add to what Bo mentioned, when companies make those investments, so universities also have to do investments on its side as well. And across all from the Northeast to Northwest to even the Southeast, and even here in Arizona, at least I can speak for Arizona State University, when Intel is expanding and TSMC is building a huge facility out here in Phoenix, it changes the dynamics of the entire Phoenix metro area, maybe probably even the state of Arizona. And so universities have to respond. I think what influences at least programs or investments at ASU is starting from physical facilities, right? I mean, you still need to have more opportunities for students to have hands-on abilities to do projects in fabs or in clean fabs or even in non-clean fabs. That's one. So there has to be investments in physical facilities. There has to be investments in programs like mine, where ASU said, hey, manufacturing is a critical sector of the economy here in the US, and let's highlight it. And ASU is invested in an entire school that focuses on manufacturing. And I think investments like these need to happen, both in terms of physical, both in terms of intellectual capacity, even within universities, and that creates an ecosystem of participants within the entire extended ecosystem of not just the larger companies, but the smaller companies that can feed off the innovation within this area.
To kind of tap on that with the creating of the ecosystem of participants for the industry, I want to go back to Sherry on the broadening that ecosystem to even include K through 12. And Bo, you mentioned this too, that Micron is already doing this. But Sherry, how are you thinking about K through 12 as part of this ecosystem or the pipeline of people that we're bringing to the industry?
Oh my, there's so many pieces. So it's a tricky conversation to have because in some ways, because the immediacy of the need is such the focus a lot of the time, especially with companies, they need people now. We need to figure out how to get people in the doors. We have to fill the upcoming fabs. We have to make sure we have that kind of immediate talent available. And that is, of course, such a critical part. But in my view, if we don't invest now in the K-12 space, we're going to continue to have this challenge from a STEM education perspective, in terms of everything that's growing across our country. If I just focus on the US for now, but of course, this is a global challenge. But from a K-12 perspective, I think one of the things that we are trying to do at the Semi Foundation is really create an exciting narrative around the industry so that students are aware of this opportunity as they're starting to think about their jobs and their lives, because if you plant the seeds early, you might capture some hearts and minds pretty early on. So from our perspective, we're doing a lot of hands-on engineering design activities with kids in classrooms around the country, starting as early as 3rd grade. We tend to lose a lot of girls in STEM, about 3rd and 4th grade. We're trying to capture that group. We tend to lose kids of color as well that early on in STEM education. So we're trying to figure out how can we get kits? We work with microbits and circuit scribe, and we created all of this content and curriculum into the hands of kids early on, so that not only are they get excited about those hands-on activities with respect to STEM, but it also tells a little story about our industry in every piece of curriculum that we put out there in the hands of teachers. So that's one piece. We also created a whole series of semi-stories, and those are short form videos with our partner Tigbee. They're about 4 minutes long. We really identified diverse faces within the industry and had them talk about what's so exciting and intriguing about what they do, and showcase kind of the breadth and depth of opportunity in this industry. Because if kids even know about the microelectronics industry, they often have a very narrow view. You know, there's the bunny suit and the fab image that people have in their minds, which is both good and bad because it's so much broader, but those are needs as well. So we're trying to showcase the breadth and depth of opportunity. We created a career site so that kids could explore all the possible jobs, where they're located, where they can go to school to get the skills that they need and the competencies like an ASU. You know, what is Micron hiring for? Like, those are all the things that we're trying to get across the kids. That's the careers.semi.org site. It's been a really powerful tool. And we even did a documentary series this year with Road Trip Nation that's gotten millions of views, which is exciting. And it was 3 grad students essentially driving around in a giant RV, talking to people within the industry about why it's so compelling. What sustainable practices are these companies participating in? All of those things get highlighted in the documentary. And we're seeing sort of a shift in energy and excitement around this industry from a lot of those pieces, but it's certainly not just us. There's lots of work going on in this field across the country. And so we're hopeful that we're going to capture that gaze, but I think we have to get curriculum and content into schools. I think we have to develop CTE pathways for middle school and high school students into this industry. I think as a nation, we have a lot of work to do in the STEM education side of things for K-12. I could talk about this forever. I will stop there.
We might make you talk about it forever. But
Yes.
do you want to chime in a little bit, Bo, about, you know, what is the K-12 stuff you guys are doing in Central New York? Does it look like this, or how are you guys thinking about it?
Yeah, I think to Sherry's point, it's about making sure as you develop kind of this K-12 pipeline, how are we, and at Micron, and I'll give Central New York as an example, how are we really, you know, equipping the next generation of semiconductor workers to understand the breadth of jobs that are available within the industry? So for Micron, early on, we do 2 main programs. One is Chip Camp, and then the other one is Girls Going Tech, which allows for students in elementary and middle school to get hands-on learning experience to figure out things like, you know, how to develop a circuit board, what is a chip, you know, the different opportunities that are there, and really kind of that hands-on experience. We most recently, a couple of weeks ago, announced a partnership with the United Federation of Teachers, which is New York City's and New York's largest teachers union, to really make sure to figure out how do we start, and we'll be identifying schools to pilot this program, but creating a semiconductor framework for educators. I think there's a lot of emphasis on students, but how are we also equipping educators to be able to ensure that within these K through 12 schools, that they're teaching both from a CTE perspective and from a STEM perspective, the correct curriculum to ensure that these students have interest and learn about the semiconductor industry. We've also, you know, doubled down on some of these efforts by in Central New York and across the country by partnering with the National Science Foundation and the Robert Noyce to really make sure to figure out what are some of the best practices, what are the programming that we can partner with to make sure that we're investing in educators. And then also in Central New York, investing in STEAM School, where we've committed $10 million to the STEAM School in Central New York, which will be a school really kind of focused on multiple different pathways to emerging industries that exist throughout this country, and really making sure that folks get an early access to be able to know and understand and learn about what is needed to be a successful or to enter into the semiconductor workforce.
Can I add one more piece as well? It's all
Yeah.
really intriguing, and we're partnering with Micron actually on a lot of that stuff, which is amazing. Another piece of the puzzle, I think, is the apprenticeship pathway concept. Is something that we've been asked to build as well. We've been launching apprenticeships in a few states already. We're going to be launching more nationally. But I want to bring that up in the K-12 context, because another piece of that is creating pre-apprenticeship models for middle school and high school as well, which goes to kind of your point, Bo, like getting that curriculum into the hands of those kids early on. Our challenge has been getting that curriculum into public schools. Because I was an educator for a long time. I know how challenging all of that is to introduce new curriculum and content. But, as each company is building out their programs, which are amazing and powerful, and it gives me so much hope, we still need kind of this national push for all of this. So we're hoping that some of this content and curriculum can land, where it's needed across the country as we develop that out, and perhaps in partnership with companies like Micron and Bo.
To add to what Shari said, she just raised an important point. How do you get the curriculum into the K-12 space? At least at ASU, we have a unique asset in it, in the sense that ASU has its own K-12 system, which we call ASU Prep. And what that enables our faculty to do is both from a digital as well as a physical physical campus. It allows our faculty, university professors, to help their teachers in the K-12 space, both at the elementary as well as at the high school level, either having joint classes where some of the AP level physics or chemistry can be taken at the university, or university professors conducting workshops either the summer or at the semester level, just to get kids excited about it. And because it is within the Arizona State University, there is easier transfer of credits if they do want to do that, but at least just easier partnerships to enable us this constant conversation between the professors, the experts, and then moving down to the high school students that might get to hear them as needed.
Thanks for contributing that. I was just about to ask you how much ASU works, are universities involved in supporting teachers at the lower levels of education or in supporting apprenticeships? And that may not be your program specifically, but how much can higher education support the K-12 efforts, or how much should it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to be driven by the investments made by chips.gov, as well as investments coming from the National Science Foundation that still comes from CHIPS Act. So I think from every program or every investments that's being made by the federal government in this space, there's always a workforce development. And that for us, when we look at the workforce development, as Shari was mentioning, it's not just looking at the four-year colleges or whoever graduates from a four-year college, but it's also establishing that pipeline or the pathway from that K-12. So there is a component of that in every proposal or every funded activity that comes through. So I don't think, as Shari is mentioning, I don't think you can just solve this problem at the top end, which is graduate more PhDs or graduate more four-year students, but it's also making sure that there is enough of a pathway of students that, for us, that's our supply chain. And if that supply chain dries up, then we're not going to be able to tell the story at the front end. And so it's critical that as university professors, when we design our curriculum or when we design our classes, to ensure that there is an easier pathway for students who typically do not consider a technical STEM degree as an option. How might we make it easier for them, still with the rigor necessary, but making sure that they are prepared enough to be eligible for college, and that they see that a career pathway in there. And that is really something that at the university level that we can do and have the power to do. And I think investments like these really help that conversation move forward, and it's just not something that sits outside. Because this problem exists not just in the semiconductor industry, it's across the entire tech area in it. And the other aspect about this is also large universities like Arizona State do have the assets and the infrastructure to reach out to the smaller schools, to the smaller two-year colleges, and perhaps train their faculty so that they can spread their message. And I think that is also, is training the teachers is critical, not just at the high school level, but also at the two-year colleges, as well as two-year primary undergraduate institutions. And so that creates more of a spread the message, spread the expertise kind of a modality.
Daniel, I saw you kind of respond to the apprenticeships coming up. Did you have thoughts you wanted to share there?
No, I think it's a great thing. And I'm really encouraged by what I'm hearing here because I completely agree. We don't know who is going to be a great topologist after their PhD in math and come up with something important. And so not only for the, I think, overriding human reason that we want to bring everyone on board at that sort of K-12 level, but also for a reason, for the shop I'm in of national competitiveness. I mean, if we are accidentally filtering out large portions of our people, I think that's a strategic loss. So I'm really encouraged basically by hearing this idea that we want to invest in young people very early on, and that we want with these, apprenticeship programs, we're not missing out on the sort of donut hole in the middle where sometimes we think that folks who finished high school are going to go do one thing, and then we skip all the way to the very top end where we're talking about advanced degrees and that sort of thing. So I'm really encouraged by, the apprenticeship model that the trades have works fairly well. And I think expanding the access to that would be a really good thing. So basically, I'm happy to hear that for the jobs that are sort of optimization problems and the jobs that are satisfied problems where we need enough people, we're treating those differently across the whole spectrum of how much time people need to be trained for their work. So I think it's really great. And I think it's really great, to Sherry's point, that we start early because you never know who's going to make the difference.
And I think we need new solutions. For example, the generation now is completely different from what we have 20 years ago. So maybe the channels with way we communicate to our high school students or elementary school students may not necessarily be the same 20 years ago. Today, everything is digital. There's social media influencers. There's a lot of social media connections that we should leverage and put that on the good side of the social media campaign to enable to reach to that particular set of population. Because we might, if we go to the traditional channels, hey, an AP class, we might end up filtering out, but try to reach out from a broader set of what those channels might be to reaching out to a more broader set of students.
I'll say this from an industry perspective, I think it's about how does industry look at hiring? And is that hiring on a degree based or is that on a skill based opportunity? And so the CHIPS and Science Act and incentives from the states have allowed for and really kind of narrowed and focused our attention on moving towards a skill-based learning hiring approach. And so we've most recently completed one cohort of pre-apprenticeships and apprenticeship programs in Boise as we ramp up and start there. And so this ability to partner with K through 12, with community colleges, with higher institutions on this skills-based learning approach has allowed for us to be able to reach folks and also, just share the different pathways that are needed. 50% of all the jobs that are going to be available within the semiconductor industry don't require 2-year degrees. And so our ability to communicate that, our ability to hire within those parameters are going to be important for us as a company and an industry to really share those things with students as they go through their educational learning experience.
And if it's okay,
Also have to just interject here. Oh, so go ahead.
Sherry and then Daniel.
I just wanted to add that, the earn and learn model in general, the registered apprenticeship model, but even shorter earn and learns are going to be so incredibly important as we look at the jobs that need to be filled, and the community colleges are going to play such a critical role nationally in this work. The universities absolutely, but the community colleges also are going to be lifting for a lot of roles as we talk about competencies and skills-based hiring and all of those pieces. But what I want to add, and it's so nice to hear Bo, and I know the work that Micron's doing, but the apprenticeship model in the US in the semiconductor industry was not a readily acceptable model when we started talking about this about a year and a half ago or so. So I think there is a shift in thinking about how we hire, where we pull people from, how we can train, what are the true competencies that are needed to be successful. And this shift away from degrees being necessary for everything in this industry is fairly nuanced and new, I think, in the US in general, in a lot of places and for a lot of roles. And so it's been exciting. For me, it's been an exciting part of the CHIPS investment. It's creating a new way of thinking, I think, around hiring. And just looking at the sheer numbers that we're going to need in the coming years, we have to be open to that as an industry. So I think it's really powerful. And the last thing I will say is, Daniel, I can't remember the last time somebody mentioned topology. It's actually what I studied. Nobody talks about that in the math world. So thanks for adding that in. But I think all of this is really exciting just to hear the work that's going on. I mean, we work a lot with ASU, I work a lot with Micron, but the energy around workforce is something that's giving me a lot of hope, although it is a challenging hill to climb right now as well.
Daniel, let's hear from you.
But hopefully we're not lagging here, but to build off of that, and I'm glad, Sherry, I'm glad you went first. And we also have to think that, when we're training people, we're training them to be ready at different times. So when we have workforce shortages now, we have to think about things like H-1Bs and bringing in great talent and retooling. But when we look at what does a fab floor look like now compared to what a fab floor looked like in 2005, I think that tells us something about what we need to be preparing our middle schoolers for. We're shooting at a moving target. And so that's why I think these sort of general approaches to building STEM literacy and getting more people into the tent early, and then this sort of the earn and learn model, these sorts of more tailored things later on in someone's educational journey are really effective, because you have a clearer picture of what they're going to be doing on the job if they're going to enter that market in 2 years than if they're going to enter it in 10. So I'm really glad to hear that that's sort of being thought about as different.
But I think a lot of it comes back to creating these lifelong learners, these inquisitive learners that are interested in moving at the pace at which we're seeing this all unfold, right? We can't possibly predict what our third graders now are going to be looking at. I can't even imagine what that world's going to be like. I mean, I can dream about it, but who knows? But I think you're right. And I think it's pretty exciting to think about how do we create those learners and open up this pathway as a viable and exciting opportunity. Starting early on is going to be so incredibly important, and creating and generating excitement around STEM in general is a need in this country in such a significant way. So I'm going to be leading a revolution soon, and then you guys can be part of that with me.
I mean, at least from the apprenticeship model and learn to more a lesson that, or rather, a point of discussion within state universities across the nation is how do you accommodate that kind of a model within a 4-year degree program. Let's assume a 4-year degree, or even a master's or a PhD. Master's or PhD have some level of flexibility, but in a 4-year program, I think one of the positive outcome of the pandemic is a significant infrastructure in the online capabilities, so that there is a student who might go for an apprenticeship program and still be able to take 1 or 2 classes, right? Previously, that was just hard to do. Today, at least the infrastructure is available to do it. The question, though, now is the programs ready to accommodate, and do they allow students to take that as a pathway? Because a lot of the universities are being measured by what are the 5-year graduation or 6-year graduation rates, and inevitably an apprenticeship or an extended co-op is going to always extend that time. And maybe as universities, we got to rethink what that metric is. As long as the student is progressing, as long as the student is contributing to the economy or making progress towards their education, then that might be the right metric to look at. And this touch on lifelong learning. I mean, absolutely. I mean, if a student expects that even a PhD, the skills, if you're not continuing to keep on learning, then you're going to be irrelevant in the next 5-10 years, right? And so as universities, what we can do is make sure that, hey, we're giving you a base foundation. We are teaching you how to learn or teach yourself. And to critically think and to question in terms of technology pros and cons, and then keep the needle moving forward. And establishing that base foundation is necessary, but also looking at metrics by which we evaluate ourselves to enable these kinds of apprenticeship and extended co-ops to be part of the curriculum, and recognize that these students it will be counted for in the curriculum. And as Micron expands, as Micron invests, or companies like them do, that they see that, hey, it is okay for me to do that, and I'm not going to be penalized on the academic pathway.
I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit. We've talked a lot about building the pathways to get people into the industry, get excited about it, see the opportunities that are available. But one thing that I've heard anecdotally from a lot of scholars, both looking at the United States, but also looking at the Taiwanese chips industry, is that sometimes people don't want to participate in this industry because the jobs are very demanding and tough. And so, building the pathway is step one, but then convincing people that this is a good pathway is potentially a separate step. I would love to hear any thoughts that you all have about, how much is that swaying people away from wanting to participate in the semiconductor industry, and what can be done about that? And is it a reality?
Oh, that's such a good and hard question. I think that is a reality. I don't think it's an easy path to get into this industry. I think there are some hurdles we have. When we do focus group learning with students, when we look at the veteran community also is another really incredible community to look to in terms of moving folks over as they shift to civilian careers. The awareness is one piece. The work-life balance is another piece. The paths of study are, in some cases are more challenging, or how people perceive them certainly is more challenging. There's a lot that has to happen, I think, on an industry side as well, where we have to look at our own hiring practices as an industry. We have to look at our promotion practices. We have to look at our work-life balance and how we're doing that. We have to look at how we equate on salary. All of those pieces, I think, have to be driven by the industry to make this work, to make this attractive, to make this just as competitive a sector of tech as the Googles of the world. Because when I talk to students, that's the tendency, right? TikTok and Google and Meta and we're like, no, come make chips. And so in order to do that, I think we have to examine how we work as an industry to make sure that we're making these pathways seem exciting and interesting and something that people want to do. And I think that's going to be kind of a whole of industry approach at this point. Even as we saw layoffs across other industries, we were still struggling. Everybody thought that was going to be the answer. And so we have a lot of work to still do in this space. I think that's real. I think that's a real challenge.
So
I'll chime in and say, I think it's I think we as an industry and Micron's approach has really been around what are the barriers of entries that different communities feel like are inhibiting them from participating in the semiconductor industry. For women and families, we have identified childcare, so putting childcare facilities on site allow for, to Sherry's point, an ease of mind as you're raising your family to be able to have an opportunity to put your kids through childcare when working at Micron. We also know that that's not going to be enough. So how are we investing in partnerships with the YMCA or investing in home-based childcare solutions throughout the community? So we've invested about $1 million right now in home-based childcare solutions in Central New York to really kind of address that. In New York, we announced a partnership of $500 million between the state of New York, Micron will invest $250 million, and then also committing to raise an additional $150 million to really make sure that we're addressing these barriers to entry that folks have and that folks have realized is an inhibitor to, again, joining the semiconductor industry. We at Micron have had a really good opportunity and engagement with the veterans community that Sherry had mentioned. Right now, 17% of our U.S. hires are veterans are from the veterans community. And that is above the national average of 5 to 6%. And so how do we as an industry collectively work towards increasing that? For Micron, we're partnering with the International Veterans Military and Families Institution that's based at Syracuse University, but then also has operations throughout the country to be able to make sure that what we've seen in our U.S. expansion efforts so far is able to be replicated and scaled throughout the U.S. So it's on us as industry to be able to show this next generation of workers that it is easy to transition into the semiconductor industry. There are learning opportunities. I work with colleagues every day where Micron has provided first and second master's degrees and doctoral programs was staying there and is helping pay for those educational opportunities. As Beno said, you have to continue to learn as you're a part of this industry. And so presenting those opportunities to folks, and then also presenting an opportunity where there also for people of color, this ability to come into the industry as well. And so, both from a, direct job standpoints, but also from the suppliers as well. How are we broadening those opportunities to folks and making sure that we're pushing a more inclusive and diverse ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, thanks. That I am encouraged to hear that there's ways to tackle this. I do want to ask again, though, the conventional wisdom that I'm hearing is that the younger generations are not interested in working the kinds of hours that a chips job demands, or that the American and European facilities are having trouble competing because of the higher pay or lower hours requirements that our workers demand to be a part of this. I guess, Binal, do you have thoughts on, are you seeing students reluctant to go into these industries, or is the pay worth it for them?
I mean, I think it is a lot to do with the Latin. They're not aware. They have never seen the insides of a fab, right? And so a lot of it, they hear, they see pictures, and that's always a snapshot of what might appear. And yeah, it is hard work, right? Undoubtedly so. But the students, at least in engineering schools, they know that any work that they get into does require hard work. And even at the technicians level, there is complementary hard work that still needs to be done in other sectors of the economy. So I don't think that's the major negative factor why I would not want to do a job in the fab industry. I think what's more important is, what do I see myself doing in a fab, or even in a fabless semiconductor industry? So what is it that I do? How do I what does it matter that what I do contributes, say, to the national security of the country, or to the economic security of the country, and how does that feel? Because I don't think the younger generation is necessarily motivated by money itself. It's more about, am I part of a larger picture? And if you can make that convincing element to it, both from high school to the university student, I think that that resonates a lot with the younger generation. And to me, as long as we make that case, we can do that.
I guess that goes back to what Sherry was saying about building the narrative, growing the spark. Sherry, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to say, like, the more experiential learning we can provide, the better. And it's really challenging in this industry to kind of get over that hurdle. But there are a lot of programs coming up that are going to provide more and more hands-on learning activities for kids. Because I agree that when kids haven't seen the inside of a fab, or they don't understand exactly what this industry is or does, it makes it much more challenging to get over the other hurdles. I think salary is one piece. I think the work-life balance is one piece. I think the DEI is critically important when we talk to students, that kids, so when it comes back to what I said earlier, I think as an industry, we need to make some shifts to kind of address your question, Kelly. Like, if we can't rise to that, we're going to continue to struggle, in my opinion. But I think, experiential learning will be powerful, as we see that continue to grow. I think looking at our own practices is going to be a really important part of the puzzle, for sure. So I agree with all that's being said. I think it's the schools, I think it's the companies, I think it's the community colleges, I think it's K-12, I think it's the investments. I think it's all of it has to come together just right in order for this to all work.
Let's talk one more question, and then we'll do some concluding statements. But we haven't really talked at all about the impact of our workforce on our resilience and geopolitics. I guess that ground's been pretty well trodden. But one thing I wanted to bring up, and Binal, you kind of alluded to it just now, is the national security implications of building up our workforce. And I know Vinal at ASU, you guys actually have a program about building out the workforce for key industries and having a domestic workforce for security sensitive things. But is there, can you unpack a little bit of what is the national security implications of having a more robust manufacturing set of people here?
Yeah. So, one of when the CHIPS Act was being discussed and when it was being passed, the discussions that were happening at ASU were like, okay, if all that the CHIPS Act did, and if we got money, and if we all we did was create a bunch of classes or a bunch of certificates, sure, we could have done that. I mean, we could have done that even without the CHIPS Act. So can we use this as an opportunity to rethink how we are teaching and the kinds of students we are teaching? And so one of the things that we wanted to do is, get students onboarded early and put them in touch with, say, companies that do security clearances or need government clearances, so that they are already on a security cleared pathway even before they have graduated out of a 4-year or a master's or a PhD. And so that cuts the time it takes for them to be productive when they do join an industry that does require a security clearance. So I think that's one of these, creating established clear pathway right up front, right during the time of their studies, so that they're productive day one as they move on into their professional careers. The second thing that we've also wanted to do is, as part of the investments that we are making as we write proposals and receive grants, it's how do we make sure that we're not just teaching our engineering students, like Daniel just mentioned topology, right? How do we get a math major or a physics major or a chemistry major learn about the semiconductor world? Because most of the time those classes are in engineering, and it's quite hard for a physics major or a chemistry major to take those classes in engineering because of the way we have structured our prerequisite upon prerequisites. And so once you miss that train, that's it, you can't take those classes. And so what we wanted to do was enable students, especially veterans or especially students who might be in other background natures, is to into classes such as electrical engineer or in chemical engineering or in manufacturing engineering, so that they see that. And so there is an easier pathway for these students who are non-traditional engineering students, but still competing within the entire semiconductor industry, and enable these students to be employed with the companies that do require from a security point of view.
So much. And I know we're coming toward the end of our time, so I think maybe we'll wrap with if each of you want to just give us your concluding thoughts on what are we doing on workforce, and what can we expect next? Are we on a good path? And what do you think is most key for government to be thinking about as we're thinking about tackling this problem and supporting industry and education in meeting the challenge? Let's start with Sherry.
Oh my gosh, you asked the hard questions, Kelly. Yes, I think we're on a good path. I think what's been exciting about this work is the number of partners that have come together to discuss it. Lots of companies in the same room talking about workforce, universities coming together to look at it, community colleges, the K-12 system is engaged and involved, workforce boards, labor unions. I mean, we are at the center of it as SEMI, because we're sort of the agnostic player, but it's been really beautiful to see this kind of coalition of partners come together to lift this particular challenge. That's the part that makes me excited. The thing that I'm nervous about, I think, is that when I look at the CHIPS investment and when I look at the workforce development plans that are arriving, I'm still nervous about kind of a siloed approach to this problem. I think I would love to see even the coalitions that are regionally based start looking towards a national network to try to lift some of this work, and there's some thinking around that with the ASA partnership. There's some thinking about that between SEMI and ASA, but I would love to see kind of a really holistic approach to all of this when I think about this challenge from a K-12 perspective, community college perspective, university, and even our companies. Like Micron's doing such incredible work. Lots of other companies are doing really incredible work. I think we just kind of keep reinventing in some ways. So I'm looking forward to when we can really share best practices, and maybe that will more organically grow once the funding is determined by the CHIPS office, so that we can all figure out how to help support from that way forward. But I see it as a very exciting opportunity right now from a workforce development perspective, and a lot of really great work happening across the country.
I guess we called out microns. Let's go to Bo next.
So, I mean, I think there's a great opportunity to scale both direct and indirect workforce jobs, and how do we continue to partner and create an ecosystem that's both inclusive and that's also training up from an industry perspective. I think that takes both from the non-traditional, which I think we've talked about pretty extensively, your trades, your folks who are going to transition from the military, your construction workforce, your technicians, the folks who are going to go into community colleges. How are we really investing in those pathways? And as early as K through 12, how are we really investing from a higher ed institution framework, not recreating the wheel, but enhancing and strengthening these university networks to be able to make sure that we're equipping and educating the next generation of engineers to be able to want to choose the semiconductor industry and to be well equipped to do that. And then also, I think one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but what are the commitments that are that industry are making in terms of other jobs within the ecosystem and the supplier network to really build up that workforce as well. And so at Micron, we've committed to doing 20% of ongoing spend with diverse supplier with kind of spend throughout our investment in New York, and 30% diverse suppliers within our construction workforce. How are we doing those tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, building up that ecosystem and that base, and really making sure that the workers are equipped to support the semiconductor industry as well. And to Sherry's point, I think there's a great opportunity to scale this opportunity, and ultimately, these folks, we want to be able to track workers, not just individual companies, but to the semiconductor industry as a whole. And so, I think we look at the next decade, the next couple of decades as really great opportunities to really build up the semiconductor workforce.
Thanks, Bo. Let's go to Binal next.
Yeah, I'd like to stress, and this was sort of raised by Bo and Sherry, is that we need to give more opportunities to hands-on learning opportunities. It's not just online workshops or online classes on multiple platforms of YouTube and Coursera and edX. It's also about the hands-on capabilities that need to be provided. And unfortunately, hands-on capabilities do require time, investment, infrastructure to be able to do that. But the more we can do that, the better it becomes, or easier it becomes to create the necessary skills that companies like Micron would need. So we do need that. And second, for example, at ASU, we're sort of creating mechanisms for incentivization for lifelong learning. And how might we do that? I think those are important facets to ensure that the learning keeps up with changes in technology as we make sure, because we just don't want to graduate a bunch of students and then the technology shifts, then what happens? So are we creating a mechanism in place so that there is incentivization for continuous lifelong learning? It's great to talk about lifelong learning, but if there is no incentivization, not just from investing in a master's education, but even short classes or short courses or hands-on nature, and how do you enable the existing workforce to come and relearn or reskill or upskill? So I think those opportunities are also very critical as we build up the workforce.
Daniel, take us out.
Sure. So I think there's sort of a basket of short, medium, and long-term things. And by that, I don't mean that we should do some things now, some things later, and some things much later, but rather that we should do some things now that will help us now, help us in a little bit, and help us farther down the road. I think with immediate shortfalls, we need to think about things like H-1B changes. If there are a lot of great people who want to come to the United States and work these high-skill, long training latency jobs, it would be nice to have them here. Also, things like changing perception and reskilling. So if we have people who are in technical fields, or if we have, we'll use the machine operator example. If we have someone in the automotive industry who has a set of skills that's readily transferable on sort of an 18-month timeline rather than a 5-year timeline, we want to change the perception of these sorts of jobs, because I think it lags reality. But I think we also want to change reality. You know, I've heard work-life balance, and I've heard salary comparison. And I think this is a little bit of a different story for US companies operating here and other companies looking to operate here. But making sure that they're genuinely competitive on some of these things that Bo's mentioned, which sound great. And then that messaging actually reaches people, so they're willing or interested in making the transition. So I think those are things we need to do now. I think for the longer term or the medium term, I'm really encouraged by this model I saw at the University of Michigan in their robotics department, where this echoes a lot of what we've been talking about at ASU with like, you don't want people to miss freshman calculus and then not be able to go into a career field for 50 years. That's a bummer. So working on some of these accreditation changes that are going to allow people to do experiential learning, maybe actually design some chips like we had folks doing in the 80s just to get them interested in this, and make it so that you're bringing some of these things under one roof. Like this U of M program was, you know, sure, you can do math, you can do physics, you can do EE, you'd be a mechanical engineer. But if you're housed in a robotics department, suddenly all of those synergies are possible and lateral movement is easier. So maybe we think about things like getting people in an academic consortium that's related to the semiconductor industry, where you can have these sort of different academic disciplines. And if you find something isn't really what you're after in 2 years, your lateral move is easier and you're surrounded by other parts of the industry so you know what's going on. I think that'd be great in the medium term. And then in the long term, these things that'll help us in a long way, I think are, first of all, remembering that we're shooting at a moving target. And I think Sherry's brought up some good points of just building broader STEM literacy so that people can pivot, because who knows what today's third graders are going to encounter. And making sure that we have everyone who wants to be in. We want to make sure that we're not having attrition of, you know, women or people of color or just really anyone as they go up through the chain for reasons other than they want to do something else. And I think if we're working on those sorts of things with today's K-12 people, that's going to set us up for enduring success, which is going to have these geopolitical implications 20, 30 years down the road. So I think those are my three baskets of things I think we should do today to help us at different times in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you to all of you. This has been a really engaging panel, and I've come away with pages and pages of notes. And I look forward to following up with all of you as we continue to talk about these topics. And thank you to our audience for joining us.